Genial.
¿Empiezo o no?
Sí, si querés te presento, Gregory.
Okay,
yo soy la chair
listo.
de la sesión, así que bienvenidos
Listo.
todos. I'm going to shift to English. The first presenter will be Gregory Elacqua, who will be talking about order effects and employment decisions, experimental evidence from a nationwide program in Ecuador. Each of us has 25 minutes, and Maria Sofia will be telling us 5 minutes before the end. Okay. So go ahead, Gregory.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ana. I'm glad to be here today. And this is a paper that I have with Nicolas Asserman, Luana Marota, and Sophie Olsen. Luana's at the bank, and Nicolas is at Getulio Vargas in Brazil, and Sophie's at a private company in Denmark. She left the bank recently. So what's the motivation for our work really has to do with inequality. There's persistent socioeconomic achievement gaps across most countries in Latin America. If you look at national assessments or even international tests such as PISA, low SES students lag behind their advantaged peers by 1 to 2 years. So let me shut down my other thing here so I don't have people sending me messages every 2 seconds. Sorry about that. My RAs tend to send me like 1,000 messages. There we go. Shut it off. Okay. And the gap is usually most estimate between 1 and 2 years between advantaged and disadvantaged students. We also know that teachers are the most influential schooling input to mitigate learning gaps. I'm sure most of you have seen the study at IDB called Cerrando Brechas, which is an experiment in Ecuador where they measure the value added of having a good teacher. And they find that if you have a low performing student from a disadvantaged family that has just an above average teacher for 4 consecutive years could basically eliminate the learning gap in Ecuador. And this is very consistent with studies, Cherry and other studies in other places. Now, what people talk about a little bit less, but which is really important for policy, especially these days when countries have tight budgets and competing resources with health and other sectors, that teachers are also the most expensive schooling input for most school systems. School systems spend between 60 and 90% of resources on teacher salaries. And that's in most countries in Latin America. And so we've been looking at 2 different things: how teachers select and assign their teachers. And we have a regional study that I'm happy to share that just kind of explores what are the processes of how do countries select and assign their teachers. And we find that most systems, there's a lot of discretion. It's not very transparent. It's highly inefficient. We with 2 exceptions, and one of them we'll talk about today is Ecuador and Peru, where they have centralized assignment mechanisms. What we find in systems, including Ecuador and Peru, though, they're highly inefficient in the sense that over half of applicants in the selection process, do not get assigned to a vacancy. They don't get a job. And this is mainly due to a lot of market congestion. So there's a high concentration of the applicants in the same school. So for example, in Peru, about 1/3 of applicants out of I think they had 15,000 applicants, 1/3 of them applied to schools that had over 11 applicants per vacancy. So to oversubscribe schools, and about 30% of vacancies had no applicants. So the processes tend to be highly inefficient. In these teacher assignment processes, we also find in this paper and in others that they lead to teacher sorting and to increasing inequalities. And I'll just show you this, some of our work in Peru. If the little red dots are vacancies, all of the dots are vacancies. The red dots are vacancies with applicants during the hiring process, and the yellow dots are vacancies that didn't receive any applicants. So about 50% of the selected vacancies are in disadvantaged or low income schools. And you can see two other, one extreme is Loreto, the region of Loreto, which is in the Amazon. 83% of the vacancies were not selected by any of the candidates. And in the intercultural bilingual vacancies, where mainly disadvantaged indigenous students attend, 85% of those vacancies were not filled in the last contest. So when the research on examining the teacher labor supply, most find that teachers have strong preferences for distance. They care a lot about distance. They do not want to travel very far away from their homes, and they often choose a school and with already thinking about the next school that's going to be closer to their home that they're going to transfer to. But they often have strong preference for urban schools that serve more advantaged students. And just like I showed in the previous graph, we find similar things across Latin America. We've looked at, Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, Chile, and Brazil, and we have another paper on this where you find teacher sorting inequities in the allocation of more advantaged teachers. And so as a result, most vulnerable and remote and rural schools tend to suffer the most from the shortage of credentialed teachers. And this has serious implications for inequities and SES achievement gaps in Latin America, not outside of Latin America. I know there's more debate on this, but most research in the region shows that temporary teachers tend to have lower value added with regards to student learning than credentialed teachers. I'll show you some data on this in a second. And this is just getting into Ecuador, where I'm going to be looking at today. This is a little bit different. The map shows something a little different, but it's basically the same idea or punchline, that you see the red dots are teachers that actually pass the test to become a teacher or not. Second, and where they live. And the little green flags are vacancies. And so this is before they actually go and apply to these vacancies. But you can just see there's also an imbalance. So you have most of the teachers live in urban areas and they're concentrated with less vacancies. And in the more rural areas, you can see there are very few teachers that live. And actually, this is from the intercultural bilingual contest. And I'm not going to show you today, but just to give you a sense. And you often find there's a mismatch between languages. So you'll have teachers who speak a specific language. They don't live close to a school that offers that language, so they end up having to teach in another school. And this generates a lot of inequities as well in Ecuador. And so what happens, what I mentioned before, is most of the vacancies that go unfilled in the contest are filled by less qualified temporary teachers. Most of these are teachers who do not meet the minimum standards to become a tenured teacher. And you can just see it across some countries. You can see low SES schools, they have a much higher proportion of teachers that are temporary teachers. And actually, we find in Ecuador and Peru, we looked at this a little more carefully. Often in the low SES schools, these are teachers who don't even have minimum credentials. They often don't even have higher education. Whereas in the high SES schools, they're temporary teachers, but they're often teachers who pass the test who are just waiting for the next contest so they can apply for that vacancy. So this generates a lot of teacher sorting and really amplifies and exacerbates inequalities in student learning. And so how does, getting to our study and experiment, how does teacher selection and assignment in Ecuador work? Since 2013, the Ministry of Education has selected teacher candidates and assigned them to vacancies through a centralized process known as Quiero Ser Maestro. And this process has 3 phases. The first phase, teachers have to pass a psychological and knowledge exam, which has a weight of about 60% of their total score. And then the second phase, they have to present their credentials, their years of experience, and there's some other things that they look at as well. And they have to do a mock class in front of it's a centralized, actually, this is also a centralized instrument, which is very interesting and different from Peru, where a principal and some other colleagues or other teachers evaluate the mock class to get a score on their pedagogical skills as well. And in the last contest, only 27% of the almost 130,000 applicants passed the test. So these numbers are actually even worse in Peru. Only usually between 7 and 10% out of the over 100,000 that apply every year pass. So these are very rigorous filters to try to establish a minimum standard of quality in Ecuador and Peru are two countries that have this. There's some other countries that have centralized selection tests like Colombia, many states and municipalities in Brazil, but Ecuador and Peru that I know that have a centralized selection and a assignment. So after the teachers pass these tests, they are eligible to go online, and they have a time they can go online. They can see all of the vacancies in the country, and they can choose and rank up to 5 vacancies. Then these are assigned by an algorithm that has very similar properties to acceptance, which takes into account scores and preferences. So basically, the top score for each vacancy that applied to this vacancy will get the vacancy. I just mentioned an aside that we've also conducted research on this because this is a change. Prior to this, in the 2019 contest, teachers were allowed to choose up to 3 circuits rather than schools, which are kind of small neighborhood school districts. And they used something more similar with similar properties as an immediate acceptance algorithm. And so we in this other paper, which I'm happy to share if anyone's interested in this, we find that the changes also generated a lot of efficiency and equity gains. So teacher sorting in Ecuador, so vulnerable school vacancies in general, they have higher teacher turnover. They're about 1.3 times more likely to remain unfilled than more advantaged vacancies. And about 30% of rural vacancies were not selected in the last contest, and which you can see is similar to what I showed in Peru. And about 56% of candidates were not assigned a position.
Gregory,
So
there's a
what we do
question.
here,
There's a question by
Sure.
Juliet Santa
Oh, yeah.
Maria.
Sure.
I don't know. Are you okay with having questions in the middle,
Oh
or you
yeah, of
prefer to have
course.
them at the
Yeah,
end?
no,
Okay.
no. Of course, please.
So Juliet, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, thanks. I just have one question regarding the mock class. So how does it work? The candidate is interviewed by the principal and the teachers that are already in the school that this candidate is going to be assigned, or is it a random school?
It's a random
And,
school.
okay.
Yeah, it's not like Peru, or as you know, Juliet, in Peru, and it's the schools that they're in the second phase of the contest that they're assigned to. So they actually, the principal, what's unique about Peru's system is the principal interviews the teacher and they conduct the mock class at the school. But in Ecuador, it's a randomly assigned school. And the principal and teachers, usually actually the teacher does not apply to this school. It's just that they use a randomly assigned school as a way to evaluate the teacher.
And
so it's a more centralized process.
Sorry, one more question. Do they have guidelines to rate the candidate, or
like rubrics? Yes, they do. They have rubrics to rate the candidates. So it's, in that sense, it's very similar to Peru, or maybe if you know about Docente Más in Chile, they also have and even in Colombia they use this kind of instrument. They're very similar kind of instruments and rubrics to kind of rate the, kind of similar to class and others to rate the teacher's pedagogical skills in the classroom. Or I guess the Teach instrument at the World Bank is another example. They use very similar rubrics, and it's very similar to Peru, but it's a centralized instrument.
Okay, thank you.
So thanks for the question. We experimentally evaluate an intervention that changed the order of teacher vacancies on the Quiero Ser Maestro platform in order to reduce teacher sorting, and I'll explain this now. So kind of just give you a little bit of some of the insights behind the nudge that our behavioral strategy we used. So choosing the best option, it can be cognitively demanding. So when decisions are complex, like choosing a job, So decision makers may choose to use heuristics or very simple choice rules, such as the order of options, to help the candidate or decision maker make a more informed or better decision or make a decision. And so the order in which alternatives are presented impacts choices. There's evidence to impact choices in low stakes decisions, such as surveys. There's a lot of survey research that shows the order of the options on a survey influences. They're more likely to choose one of the first options. Also, consumer purchases, things when you go online in a product, the products that are ranked first when you go into Amazon or other online platforms, consumers are more likely to choose those. And there's even a recent paper on the order of MBR working papers. People are more likely to download the papers that are higher on the list. And there's also a vast literature on this, on voting behavior, how where the candidate appears on the ballot influences the number of votes he or she will get in the election. So candidates are always trying to get their name on the top of the ballot because they know that this matters, especially when the voters don't know the names of the candidates. So that may be a high stakes decision. Of course, that's a high stakes decision, but for the voter, it's not as much of a high stakes decision. And so we argue that there's really there's more evidence on these low stakes decisions, but there's less evidence on order effects on high stakes decisions like choosing the place where you're going to work. And in the case of teachers, it's also very high stakes because it's not easy to ask for transfer. They can't easily change from one school to another school quickly. And so we conducted with the government of Ecuador, we worked very closely with them on this, on an experimental evaluation of a zero cost program. And the objective of the government in Ecuador was to attract more qualified teachers to disadvantaged schools, or what they called hard to staff schools. And how did they define hard to staff schools? These were schools that had a high proportion of unfilled vacancies. So in previous contests, nobody applied. They had a high share of, as a result of this, temporary teachers. And these also tend to be lower performing schools. And that's how they created an index and classified the schools. And the intervention was very simple. What we did is we altered the order in which hard to staff vacancies were presented on the Quiero Ser Maestro platform without changing any of the information or altering any of the incentives. All of the teachers in the control and treatment groups, also shown in a minute, could see the same information if they wanted to. The only difference was the order which they saw there. And then after the teachers finished the process, we conducted a survey to all teachers to understand the mechanisms behind the order. So here you can see the control group and the treatment group. The treatment, this is the way it actually appeared on their platform. The treatment, the hard to staff schools were highlighted with this icon where the government put schools where you can have a higher impact on student achievement. All of the candidates could see that because that was really important for the government. The only difference was the order. They could see the information about the school name, the location, the address, etc., the number of vacancies offered. But the only difference is in the control group, it was listed by alphabetic order, and the treatment group, we just listed the hard to staff schools first. But the teachers could all scroll down, see all of the schools. And so just to start wrapping up the summary of our results, where the candidates in the treatment group, we found a large effect, were 5.2 percentage points more likely to rank a hard to staff school as their first choice, which in the mean of the control group was about 40%. And that we also found that the proportion of hard to staff schools within their 5 options was 1.4 percentage points higher for the treatment group as well. We also found effects on the final allocation because that just looks at their preferences, how they rank the schools and in what order. What matters is where they were finally assigned. And we found that the treatment group were 3.4 percentage points more likely to be assigned to a hard to staff position than the control group, and the mean of the control group was 27%. And so then we tried to dig a little bit deeper with our survey to understand these order effects. And so one thing we looked at was whether or not individuals were more or less attentive. So I think that inattentive individuals may be more likely to be impacted by the order. They're less likely to pay attention, and we conducted a a test on the survey to measure attention. And we did not find that this to be driven by inattentive individuals. You could also argue that individuals with higher cognitive skills may be more likely, or lower cognitive skills, I mean, may be more likely to be affected by order effects, because they may have less information and capacity to weigh the alternatives and evaluate and make a more informed choice. We did not find this, and we used the test scores on the knowledge test. Or you also may find, and this is some of our work in Peru, on altruism, if more altruistic individuals, because we found that when you make the reasons to choose a school salient, more focusing more on altruism, like we did an experiment with teachers in Peru, it impacted especially high performing individuals. We did not find that here. We did a simple test of altruism on our survey, and we did not find that. However, we did find that choice overload and fatigue seemed to play a role. So the effects of our experiment were significantly larger when teachers had a larger set of alternatives, of vacancies to choose from. When they were in districts where they had lots of choice, the order effect was much larger. So just to conclude, if there are any questions, so teacher sorting reinforces SES achievement gaps in education. And another thing that I haven't talked about, and we also have some work on this in Chile, looking at more traditional, and Chris Nielsen and some others have some work on this in Peru as well, looking at traditional monetary incentives. So these are very expensive policies. For example, in Ecuador, you don't have these. In Peru, you can earn up to 30% higher over the base salary. In Chile, it's very similar. And these are not always effective, and they're very expensive. And the evidence is more mixed on the effectiveness of these. However, we would argue that low cost, or in the case of Ecuador, zero cost strategies based on behavioral sciences, if anything, they can complement and they can improve the effectiveness of other more traditional policies to attract teacher candidates to hard to staff schools. I'll just mention in Peru, one thing that we did is we realized in focus groups that teachers were often not informed about the traditional policies, which schools had the monetary incentives. One thing that we've been working on with the government in Peru is to make this information more salient on the platform, so teachers have better information when they make their choices. Some of the future work that we're doing on this, we're looking at how maybe new technologies and centralized platforms can improve teacher satisfaction, the match, and reduce sorting and congestion. So one thing that we're going to be working on with Peru, we're starting to work with Peru on, for instance, is how to improve the user experience of teachers on the platform. So maybe recommend schools to them that are closely aligned with their preferences. Maybe provide virtual tours of the school so they can actually see where they're going to go, because often it's very costly for a teacher to go and visit the school before they choose it, so they can see what the school looks like, what the area looks like, so they can make more informed decisions. We just did a large experiment in the last concurso in Ecuador, where we basically predicted the riskiness of teacher applications. There's been some work on this in student enrollments. And so if a teacher was applying to only oversubscribed schools, we would send them a text message and say, your application is risky, you may not get a job. You may want to go back and reassess your choices, or add schools to your application if you don't have 5, or maybe think about changing your schools just to make sure you can get a position. And we recommended other schools that were close by to their house that were less, that had less demand. And finally, we're starting some work that looks at the ranking of teachers. We found in Ecuador, for example, we actually recommend the government to have an unlimited list, but for a lot of governments, for some reason, they often truncate the list. They think that it's not good for some reason, that it's not good to give them too many choices. Let's limit the choices. And we found that in Ecuador, that almost 85% of teachers listed 5 schools. So that may mean that they're actually not listing, they may be leaving some schools out. In Peru, the nice thing is they can list an unlimited number of schools, and it wasn't always like that. So we have some research that we're doing on the impact of just this rule. How many schools can they list when they apply? The impact that this may have on teacher satisfaction and and efficiency. So I'll end there.
Thank you very much, Gregory. Just in time. So now the next presenter is Cristian Lopez Vargas, who will talk about voice messages and early immunization, a field experiment. Thank you, Cristian.
Thank you. So let me share the slides and let's see how this goes. Full page, okay. And right, let me know if you can see it. Can you?
Yes, perfect.
So trying to have the okay, have the chat here, your faces. Okay, good. We should be ready to go. So, folks, thank you first for accepting my paper, and it's a pleasure to be discussing this research with all of you. Comments are extremely welcome. This version of this paper, I think, is the first or the second time we're presenting it. We had an earlier version that was like largely improved. It was circulating a few years ago, so you might have seen this somewhere else, but this is a newer version still in the works. So your comments are again very welcome. This is a joint work with Sandro Parodi, Indira Ramirez, and Paola Villaparo. Let's see. So, well, I'm gonna follow the standard outline, say something about motivation, a little bit, very briefly about literature, then the design, and then the results. Don't worry too much about the number slides because I'm gonna skip many of them. Try to focus on the important ones. So the motivation is it's pretty easy because now we are extremely aware of how important vaccines are. These are vaccines for toddlers and infants. And the rough motivation is that, of course, it's one of the most cost-effective strategies to improve children's health with the cost-benefit ratios estimated in the order of tens. Several sometimes goes from 20 to 40 times the cost in terms of this ratio of benefits to costs. There are several estimates out there how many lives could be saved with more complete or higher coverage of vaccines, and some estimates by who say that at least 1 million lives could be saved among children if the coverage would be not even 100%, but close to 100%, or closer to 100%. There has been an expansion in vaccine infrastructure or the supply side, but it's interesting, it remains still today a very important challenge to increase the take-up of vaccination among the poor worldwide. And so that means that there is some demand side limitations, and there is, of course, things related to information, but as I will briefly discuss, and maybe we can discuss a bit during the presentation and after, some behavioral aspects to this as well. This is an experiment in the Dominican Republic where, again, there is, the indicators or the figures regarding the immunization rates for children among the children are still concerning even today. It has improved a little bit from what it's shown here, which is pretty much before our experiment, but still it's a great challenge. What happened? Okay, so just in case something happens and you need to leave and you don't get to see the full duration of this presentation, this is a summary. It's an experiment in the metropolitan area of Santo Domingo, the Dominican Republic. Over 7,000 households were assigned into different treatments, and these households were, not all households, were a sample that had children between 0 and 5 years of age and pregnant women with 6 months of pregnancy or more, or later. This was an RCT. The treatment consisted of 23 messages that conveyed a cocktail, in a sense, of different messages, some of them related to information about the benefits of vaccination. Some other ones were reminding them to keep up with their schedules. There's some that are closer to social norms and some affect-related motivations as well. So 23 once per week over a number of months. And the two treatments were varying the source, the pretty much the voice. In one case was the vice president of the country, then of course in 2014, and the other one was a radio host, an anonymous or like not a known person. Okay. To our knowledge, this is the first study that is looking into a political figure as part of a campaign or voice message campaign to improve vaccination. The outcomes are sort of standard: number of vaccine visits, number of doses, and then delays and timely immunization. Although today I'm going to talk about mainly the first two, because we are actually improving the definition of the second of the third and fourth outcome here. So I'm gonna say less about them because it's right now in the works to have a more precise calculation. I'm gonna say why I'm improving those definitions when I get there. So what we find is that there is some positive spillovers for controls. So controls that have nearby more households that have received treatment, they do get also a boost in their vaccination rates. And interestingly, and this is kind of the most interesting part of this paper, is that we find that treated households do have a positive impact, but if there is too high density of treated around them, meaning too many households around them receive the message from the vice president, they have a backfire or backlash in the sense that they reduce their vaccination rates to a point sometimes in which it makes it a null effect. Okay, so that's kind of the interesting part. Let me just really go really quickly through this link with the literature. I mean, immunization has a massive externality. The policy prescription is to make vaccination free or heavily subsidized. As I mentioned, there is evidence that worldwide the supply side has expanded, but there is also worldwide evidence that among the poor, especially, households do not have high enough take-up, presumably because of lack of information, but other biases, cognitive biases as well. So it seems that is it all information? No, there is evidence that shows that beyond information, there are some other aspects. There is some interesting studies. Let me just to mention one example here. There is this study in 2004, which is an imperfect study, but I think shows why the behavioral aspects are very important. In this Leveran 2004 study, they compare automated calls versus a personalized intervention when the people literally call, a human calls, and if they don't answer, they go to their houses and remind them about their vaccination, incoming vaccination appointment or deadline. And they find that the automated call does have an impact, but this personalized intervention does not have an impact. And when they combine the personalized plus the SMS, also there's no impact. So it seems that people do have very context-dependent reactions to how heavy-handed, in some cases, these interventions or policies are regarding how we remind them or tell them to get vaccinated. So, and there are other studies that shows the opposite, in the sense that when it's more personalized, there's positive impact and so on. So it's really still in the judge, and there is a lot of research even in the last 2 years, even more about vaccination, but there's a lot of things we don't know. Okay. Well, to make it not too long, what we care about in this study is this aspect of how a well-recognized political figure can be used possibly as part of a campaign, if it's useful or not useful, and so on. And few other contributions we have is that we have a very precise measurement of the vaccination behavior, because we literally take images of the vaccination cards and we then digitize those photos of the vaccination card. So we have like date by date, vaccine by vaccine information, and then we have this geocoded data that can help us or helps us to study these spillover effects, at least in the geographical sense. Of course, it has some limitations, but we will get to those. So the experiment setting is in the Dominican Republic. It happened in 2014, 14 through early 2016. This information that you probably know about the DR, so I'm gonna just mention that the infant mortality rate is 5 times, a bit less than 5 times what is in the US. And immunization, it's also still lacking. This is around the time of the intervention, 2013-14. The only about half of children in these ages between 18 and 29 months had received all the basic vaccines. And when we look at our own data, we see that timely vaccination is even worse, like less than half in the first year of life, and literally 1 in 10 in the second year of life, and so on. So it's really, really low. So now let's talk about the experiment. Please feel free to ask any questions during my talk, so we use the time efficiently. So we had over 7,000 households, mainly low-income households, and mostly beneficiaries of a cash transfer program in the DR. Like I mentioned earlier, this household had the criteria to be part of the study was that they contain children of ages 0 through 5 and women with pregnancies 6 months or later. The treatment messages, I'm going to show a few examples in a second. The treatment messages, oh, wait a second, I close the, let me see. All right. So let me have this to see if there is any hand raised. Okay. So the treatment messages contain information and in some cases encouragement regarding the benefits of vaccination, timely immunization, how easy is, how low cost is to get vaccinated, and one message was even about keeping their vaccination card in a safe place. These messages were, kind of crafted by our team initially, and then out of maybe, I don't remember exactly the number, but maybe around 50 messages, a specialist from the country and also a group of household heads, also beneficiaries from this cash transfer program, curated the messages. So they modified the language, suggested changes, and selected the ones they believed would have like a better, resonate better with this population. At the end, we have 23 messages, and each message lasted 20 to 30 seconds, which is roughly what some of the literature recommends for voice calls, like voice messages or automated calls. Cannot be like way above 30 seconds because they hang up the phone with almost certainty after that time interval. So like I mentioned, there are 2 treatments, standard radio host and vice president, RH and VP from now on. These are a couple of examples of messages. So this is the message from, the first one is one from the vice president and the second one is the radio host, but the second one did have this greeting that said that was from this cash transfer program. I hope, I mean, probably everyone here speaks Spanish, but pretty much this is saying like taking care of our children so they grow healthy is our duty as parents. Let us apply to all vaccines to our children at the time it's proper, something like that. And then we have several of them. So the randomization happened at two levels. The first level, we still call it cluster, although we can I mean, all full disclosure, we can question if it's cluster in the standard sense. So we use surveyor routes from the baseline as clusters because they were mostly, but not always, mostly grouping households that were nearby each other. And we have the following first stage. All clusters were divided in 5 groups, and there was three complete assignment clusters in which everyone, for example, in the first one, everyone in these clusters received a message from the vice president. In the second one, all households in this cluster receive message from the radio host, and the same for the control. And then we have some half clusters which have received a VP and half control, and the other one have radio host and half control in the last case. Within these clusters, of course, for the half, the assignment of households in control versus VP was at random, as you might imagine. And the idea behind this was to increase some variation in the density. What happens, you might remember this from other papers or some from your coursework, if we just do simple random sampling, then the density, let's say 5 blocks radius, will be too uniform, like households will have the same density. And by adding this feature, we were able to add some variation in the density around the households, and we use 5 blocks, but we also do some other definitions. This is just a graph of where these households were allocated and or assigned. It's not very important. This is a bit more important. It's the timeline of the study. So we collected the baseline December 14 to March 15. The intervention, meaning the messages we sent between May 15 and November 15, and we call this period all the way to February 16, the period of analysis, okay? And then the end-line survey was collected in May 16 to November 16, okay? So we call this pre-intervention interval, and this is the period of analysis, okay? I already mentioned that we had in the end-line survey, we had this good thing that we have geocoordinates and we have image proof of their vaccination records. This is a standard balance table. So some of the main outcomes, number of doses, number of visits, all the way to few indicators of socioeconomic variables like heads of the household heads education, as well as the unmet basic needs. They are statistically balanced across these groups or conditions. I'm gonna go really fast about the compliance because it's really, I mean, not crucial, I guess, for a short presentation. Many in the studies that use calls or SMS, there is a big issue about compliance, and we do face some of that. So, for example, conditional on the duration of the phone call. Wait, what is this? Yeah, so let's call it the success rate, which is, I guess, the summarized measure of compliance here, meaning calls that when for more than 5 seconds went to 50% to 30% by the end. But 5 seconds, we think it's not a bad measure because by 5 seconds we already have mentioned something about vaccination, usually in most of these 23 messages. But however, it's not as bad as in other studies, because the percentage of phones that remain active went down from 90 to 70%, and the calls that were answered went down from 60 to 40%. So it really doesn't go to zero as in sometimes one sees in some studies. So this was for the duration of the calls, and the success rate. So it goes down. This is kind of the time varying version of what the figures I was mentioning. And on the right panel, it's worth mentioning that this duration for the control is because they receive a void call saying that this is a test. And of course, this message was much shorter. So that's why it was always low. It's not because they hung up earlier. The call itself, the message itself was shorter for the controls. This placebo or this void message was just shorter. So let's talk about some of the results, the outcomes. As I said, is visits and doses. And I'm going to say something about the delays in a second. These are just descriptive stats about those outcomes. So I'm going to also skip this because we want to get to the results. We did some event studies, and we find something. So focus on the first two, which are the outcomes that I was saying that we will focus. And so there's a decline, which is expected because with age, the number of vaccines that need to get applied is low. And then at the moment of intervention beginning, there is a jump, but both in controls and treated, which is an indication that could be a spillover. And later we will confirm this. Okay. Let me skip the specifications to go directly to the table. So we kind of make sure we discuss the key parts of these results. So intention to treat, not considering spillovers, are 0, like nothing's here. Okay. But luckily we designed this to have spillover being considered or studied, and that's why we will see the next table. Sorry, let me skip these ones and let me go directly to this. Okay, so in the specification we're going to see next, we have the density of households around my household, the density of households 5 blocks or a 500 meters radius that receive the vice president message among all households in the study. Okay, and the same thing for the radio host, and of course all the corresponding interactions that we will see here. So this is the main interesting result of today. So what do we find here? When we consider all these densities, we find very interesting results. First, the message of the okay, so do I have like 3 minutes, or am I? Yeah, good. 3 minutes, fine. Or how many minutes? 3. Okay, good. Thank you. So these two here are the impact, the spillover impact on controls, right? So, and we see that it's strong. This is like literally number of visits, and it's positive only for messages from the VIP. So it's, in a sense, having households around that receive messages from the vice president does help total doses and visits, like clearly. This, when you consider the density, also the impact on, the impact itself, like the difference between control and treated, is also important, and it's for both vice president and the radio host. All this for significant positive impact here. And okay, so far not too crazy, but this is the interesting thing, that when you consider how that impact changes with the density around your household, that one does have a negative impact. So meaning this number here, for example, means that when you have more households, there's a scale here that it's not easy because it's in the density is in a ratio, but we have some kind of back of envelope, and it's economically relevant. So this means that if you are in a household that have almost no density, you don't have other households around that receive the vice president message, you have strong impact. But if you have high density, meaning other people around you are receiving the same message, you reduce the impact you have. And the question, of course, is like, how does that happen? Is people feeling less special about receiving a message from the vice president or a message in general? Is this really through communication? And we have some preliminary evidence that shows that it's possibly through communication or social ties. So I don't know if there is any question on this table, which is the most important one. If not, let me go to show you this table here, which is a first attempt to look into possible mechanisms. And here, for example, we see, and if you focus on this row there, that if you have more friends that live nearby your house, which is we anticipated this could be a possibility, but maybe we didn't anticipate it would be that strong and it would be that negative, or it would be negative actually. So we did ask like how many friends or family you have nearby your household, and the more you have of them, the smaller is the impact of the vice president message. It's not significant for the radio host. So there is anyway. So just to wrap up without the conclusion slide, it's interesting because there is a lot of inconclusive evidence in the literature, and as I mentioned in this example by this paper by LeBaron, sometimes there's an indication that there is some backlash, some backfire or backlashes. And so understanding better when that happens, again, and which agents or when the campaign has which features these negative effects can happen, can help us design optimal campaigns. In this case, the optimal campaign would be an optimal density, right? The higher density would be bad, zero density would be bad too. With an optimal density. And so the paper will hopefully include some discussion and simulations on what, according to this data, will become an optimal campaign. And let me leave it there. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Christian. So now it's my turn. I will share my slides. Sorry. Okay, so first I must apologize to Gregory, who has already seen this presentation before, and he has given comments. So you are able to leave if you want, Gregory. But thanks very much for your prior comments, and they helped the paper a lot. I would like to acknowledge my co-authors. The paper is called The Effects of Crianza Positiva, a Messaging Program on Adult-Child Language Interactions. This paper is about language development in early childhood. And we know from the literature that the first years, the first 1,000 years of the child are crucial, and in particular, they are crucial for literacy development. There is many literature showing that when these children get the right inputs, the right language inputs at this stage, they have better literacy skills later on, more academic success, and they are less likely to have mental health problems, more likely to be employed, and have higher earnings in the long run. What we also see in Latin America and in other places is that there are large disparities, socioeconomic disparities, and that they are present from very early stages. We all know of this paper by Hart and Risley in 1995, who showed that by the age of 4, children in high socioeconomic status households were had heard about 30 million more words than children in low socioeconomic status households. So early experiences matter and matter a lot. And the positive thing is that we know also from evidence that early interventions work. But most of the interventions we know so far are quite expensive. So they focus on either home visits or videotaping the interaction between the adult and the child. And these interventions are expensive and difficult to scale up. So what we are doing in this paper or in this actually it's more than one paper. We design text and voice messaging intervention to nudge parents towards improving language interactions with the child. Actually, the intervention adds other topics also to the messages, but in this paper we are going to focus only on language. So we use a randomized control trial to evaluate the intervention, and the outcomes we are going to measure focus on an automatic decoding of videotaped interactions of free play between the child and the adult. They are very short videos, 10-minute videos, but we decode those videos with an automatic software and then are able to assess several aspects of the language interaction between the caregiver and the child. So what is this Crianza Positiva messaging intervention about? It is rooted on early development sciences, attachment theory, theory of demand, an ecological approach towards child rearing. It is also rooted on behavioral economics. We were a team, the design was based on a team of psychologists and economists that worked around behavioral biases and structured the messages so that they could overcome these behavioral biases. Using ICTs in Uruguay, the expansion of intelligent phones is almost 100%. Everyone has one, regardless of the socioeconomic status of the person. So accessing people via smartphone is a desirable policy because you can really get to everyone. So these messages are structured as 3 messages per week during 24 weeks, 6 months, and they are delivered after the completion of an 8-week parenting workshop. So what are the biases that we constructed or we built the messages in order to address in particular three types of behavioral biases in parents. The first one is present bias, and we explored during baseline certain correlations between some measures of these or some proxies of these biases and the frequency of parental involvement in different activities. And for example, we measured a present bias using a discount rate. I know this is not the perfect way of measuring present bias, but we used a discount rate to proxy that. And we observed that as the education of the household was lower, discount rates were higher. And we also observed that those with higher discount rates were less likely to get involved in didactic activities with the children. We also explored how frequency of parental involvement correlated with inattention and cognitive fatigue. And we proxied this cognitive fatigue with the number of negative shocks that the family had been exposed to in the past 12 months. And we also see that there is a negative relationship between the number of negative shocks and the frequency of involvement of parents in didactic activities. And third, we also explore negative identities. So poor people are less likely to feel confident about their resources as parents. And we see also that as parental sense of confidence increases, the involvement of parents in didactic activities increases. So our messages basically try to address these three types of biases. First of all, by reminding parents about the benefits of getting involved with the children. Second, by offering very simple actions, so calling to action with very, very simple things that do not require a high cognitive load from parents. And third, we send at the end of the week messages of motivation or of encouragement, just to let parents feel more confident with their internal resources. So these are the contents of the 24 weeks of messages. Some of the weeks were more related to being sensitive about the child, being responsive, expressing affection, taking care of the safety of the household. But 20% of the messages, 3 weeks, were about language. So we were proposing activities throughout those weeks. We proposed parents to engage in conversations with the child, to ask open questions, describe objects, places, and activities, sing and listen to songs with the children, read books, and tell stories. Well, this is one type of week. The Monday message would be a message explaining the benefits of, for example, talking to the child. The Tuesday message would call to action. So, for example, take advantage of every moment to tell your child what you are doing and when you are with her. For example, say, I'm changing your diapers, now I'm preparing the food, or let's go for a walk. And on Friday, we would just make the parent reflect and motivate the parent to continue doing this kind of things. So we conduct this RCT. We have a two-stage design in which we randomize childhood centers, early childhood centers in Uruguay, 24 centers, to a treatment and a control group. And also within the treatment group, we randomized some families to treatment and some families to control in order to assess spillovers. I'm not going to focus on spillovers here because our sample gets too small and we are not able to focus on that. But basically, the timeline of the program, it goes from September 2017 to November 2018. From September to December, we had this 8-week workshop, and after the workshop, families, the centers were randomized into treatment and control. So we only randomized the messages. We did not randomize the workshop, right? So all the families had experienced this workshop. And we evaluate the program 3 weeks after the text and audio messages finish, from between August and November 2018. In terms of compliance, we measured who received messages. We sent messages through SMS and through WhatsApp. And we were able to see that 83% of families received SMS messages and 87% received WhatsApp messages. And among those that received WhatsApp, 69% opened the messages. So we think it was a pretty high response rate. So as I was telling you in the introduction, we measure outcomes using this 10-minute video recording of free play between the caregiver and the child, and decode this video using automated software to assess the degree, the extent to which the software really captures the language interaction. We decode some of the videos manually and then correlate the annotated and automatic outcomes, and we see a high correlation, above 70 or 75%. we like this measure because we think that it's less subject to desirability bias, and it's not usually assessed in large-scale evaluations. The problem is that it was not easy to get a video of every family, and we only got 35% of the sample with a video recording at baseline and follow-up. So that's the sample we are using, but that sample is balanced across treatment and control families. As you see, here is a large list of family characteristics, and we see that except for one variable, all the rest are balanced at a 5% level of significance. So what, in terms of results, what do we see? We see effects on the duration of child vocalizations, which are opposite of what we expected. So we see that the duration of child vocalizations increases in the treated group, but the duration of adult vocalizations increases among treated parents. So I'm going to talk a bit more about this, but we think that it may be a crowding out effect of parents trying to talk more in a setup of 10 minutes play, which is a very short time, and we think that there might be a crowding out effect of parent investment there. But what we do see is an increase in the quality also of the language that the parent directs to the child. And how do we measure quality? Well, we measure number of turns and the adult response ratio to the child vocalizations, and we don't see any effect there, but we see effects over the adult pitch range. So the adult pitch range measures the difference between the highest and the lowest frequency reached by the parental vocalization within a specific vocalization, and this has been shown in the literature to be very related to the absorption of to the attention the child shows in the communication that it's being displayed. So we see an effect of 0.42 in an outcome mean of 242, which is a pretty nice effect on the adult pitch range, and this effect is very robust to different analysis. So then we go and see whether there was an effect of the intervention on the self-reported engagement of the parents in literacy activities, and we observed that the intervention increased the likelihood of parents reporting reading books to the child, telling stories to the child, or naming or drawing things to the child. We also see that when we interact these effects, the intention to treat effects with the measures of the different measures of cognitive biases at baseline, we observe a positive interaction between having a high discount rate and being on the treatment. So those parents that have higher discount rates were more likely to experience changes in their adult pitch range. We also observed the same for those parents that were showing a low parental efficacy at baseline. We see that these parents are more likely also to increase their adult pitch range. So in a way, the mechanisms go in line with what we were hypothesizing and with the way we structured the messages. So to conclude, the intervention was successful at influencing parental behavior. It increased the duration of parental vocalization, and even more robustly, it increased the parental speech intonation range. This has been associated with better infant-adult connection, better levels of attention, more word recall, and more recognition of information by the listener, and better acquisition of language by the infants. In terms of mechanisms, we see that this happens through increased parental involvement in reading and telling stories and describing things to the child. And we also see that messages were most effective in parents with high discount rates and low parental efficacy, supporting the hypothesis that behavioral biases were leading the suboptimal investment. And I leave here. Thanks very much.
Is there time for any question or something, or we are?
There's plenty of time for questions.
Yeah, I think so.
I'm
not able to see you guys. I don't know what I did, but I'm not seeing you. Okay.
Maybe you should stop
Yeah.
sharing screen. Okay, there we go.
Thanks. Okay, so maybe if there are questions for Gregory, or maybe you can open the floor for any questions.
I have a brief question for you, Anna. So I'm interested in using like video processing technology. So maybe you can say a bit more about a bit more details. I mean, just brief on how does technology work, or yeah.
Yes, this is a technology that has been developed by some scientists at the University of Paris. We are working with Alex Christian, who is a psycholinguist, and she is an expert on this. And she has this automated software, DeviMi, it's called, or something like that, DeviMi, I think, which decodes any video or any recording of language interactions, and this is able to tell you the number of vocalizations by adults and by children, the count of words within each vocalization, the number of conversational turns that there are in the conversation, whether there is a response of an adult to the child vocalization in less than two seconds, and things like that. So all these outcomes,
okay.
Yeah.
From video or from audio, or both?
Well, we did it from video, but it can be done from audio too. They only analyze the audio of our videos.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah. Well, I guess I don't want to hijack the conversation, but I will definitely email you up to learn more about it. It's really interesting.
Sure, happy to, definitely.
Anna, may I ask you a question? Do you have some estimate of the cost effectiveness of the intervention?
Well, it was very, very low. In this intervention, we sent SMS, which were a bit more costly than WhatsApp, but the WhatsApp, in a subsequent intervention, we only sent WhatsApp, and we had almost sort of the same response rate from families. And with the SMS, it was like $10 per family, something very, very low. Without the SMS, it is even less than that. I have a question for Gregory. Gregory, I think your presentation was very interesting. But I am amazed to see the amount of teachers that do not pass the tests. Like only 27% of teachers pass the test. So what happens to the other teachers? And the big question here is, shouldn't we really be training teachers? I think that this is one of the questions for most of Latin American countries. We have very bad over
Yeah, I mean, that's true. And in Peru, it's even lower. So in Peru, it's like over 100,000 candidates take the test, and like 7 to 10% pass. And in Ecuador, it's like closer to 30%. So, I mean, very low. I mean, that's true. That suggests it's either the bar. You know, you could also say that they put the bar very high, and you know sometimes these decisions are budget, so they know exactly how many can pass as well. But I agree with you. I think it's a very low number. What ends up happening in Ecuador and Peru, for example, where you have these centralized systems, the teachers who don't pass, they often still teach. So either go and teach in a private school or they'll teach in a public school as a temporary teacher, and then they'll go and take the test again the next year. What surprises me in Peru, for example, you often find teachers who never can pass the test. I remember one speaking to one Ugel in Callao, and he said he had a teacher who took the test every year and she couldn't get any correct. She didn't pass, but then she would continue teaching at the same school as a temporary teacher. That worries me almost more. I kind of like the idea that they set a high standard for teachers, and not just it's not an I mean we know from previous research that a degree is not a good predictor of value added. And so there is some we actually have a paper in Peru that it's going to come out soon. There's some hopefully some information about that which instruments are better predictors of value added. And we find in Peru that the knowledge test is a pretty good predictor. In Ecuador, the Cerrando Brechas team found that it wasn't a very good predictor for primary school, but we found that it was a good predictor for primary and secondary school. But these kinds of tests, I mean, they're not perfect predictors of value added, but they do give you some information about teachers' competencies. Getting to your point, I agree 100%. I think we do need to strengthen teacher training programs. Some places like Ecuador is actually an interesting case as well. You don't have to study teaching to become a teacher. Anybody with a higher education degree can go and take Quinta Maestro. If they pass the test, they can become a teacher. And so that's another, it's kind of, they focus more on the selection of teachers rather than the training. So you can train to be a teacher, or you can train to be something else. And if you want to teach, you just have to pass these tests. In Peru, you actually have to have a teaching degree like most other places. So yeah, I agree. It may be a result of, I think it's kind of a combination of training, the quality of training, but also you still have an issue of the quality of candidates.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look in most places, the score, like the university admission scores tend to be much lower still for teaching candidates. In Chile, what they did was they raised the standards. That was a different strategy. They raised the standards to get into a teacher training program, accredited training program. You had to have a minimum score, and they're rolling it out gradually. Over time, that score is going to increase. So to even be admitted to a teacher training program in Chile, now you have to have a minimum score, and that's going to go up over time. So that was their strategy, was more kind of selecting better candidates into teacher training programs. In Ecuador and Peru, was more kind of making sure that to be tenured, you had to have minimum competencies. And like you said, most still do not. And that is something to be concerned about. I agree. Somebody asked a question there in the chat, I think. They said, what is the test about? Yeah.
Yeah, just to confirm, I don't know if it's knowledge or other kind of tests.
Yeah, in Ecuador, they have two phases. The first, and in Peru, it's a little different. But in Ecuador, the first phase, they take kind of a psychological test and then a knowledge test. The knowledge test has the most weight. So it tests their competencies, in general competencies. And if they're like a math teacher, it has a math test. And so it depends on your area of specialization, especially in secondary school. And then the second phase, which has a lower weight, but still important, you have a mock class, which kind of tests your ability in the classroom to be, manage classrooms and to teach your pedagogical skills. In Peru, they also have something very similar, but the setup is different. It's more decentralized, but they also have an interview. The principal interviews the candidates and scores the candidates based on their interview. We found that in Peru, there's no correlation between value added and teacher interview and the mock class, but there is some research in Chile that shows that these mock classes are very good predictors of value added in the teacher evaluation. So I don't know. I think that most research shows these days that it's good to have multiple instruments, and that's the best way to capture to identify better teachers. And I think Ecuador is a really interesting model in that sense, and Peru too.
Thanks, Gregory. Just thinking in the policy actions, did you present your research, but not like academic, more like policy stakeholders? Because this is in Peru, this is a discussion team, and there are many problems because teachers don't accept this kind of training because they lower their salary, and there is a lot of issue about that. But probably this kind of research could help policy makers.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we try to present to the different audiences. Peru, we both in every country that we work at the IDB, we work very closely with the government. Everything that all of the experiments and research that we do, it's kind of, we work very closely with the government on designing the experience, on figuring out what the objective is. So in the case of Ecuador, this was all with the government. So even though we wrote a paper, all of the results we first presented to the government and provided them with information. So yeah, we try to do that, but you're right, that's very important. I agree.
Thanks.
Gregory, I'm curious about the inattention test that you used to test the inattention of teachers. What was that?
It's called a Stroop test. Have you ever heard that? Where it's like you show a word and a color, and so you have to kind of quickly match the word and the color of the word, or the number, what's written and the color. So you have to think. You can't just say, have you seen these tests where you and so we use something like that. It's a proxy. Okay. And I think that our survey, it's just kind of to try to understand a little bit the mechanism. It's more descriptive. But yeah, that was what we could get out of. I mean, unfortunately, the survey was online, so we couldn't. I mean, so they could see these things online, but I think a lot of these things, it would have been better to do something like that in person. And the altruism, we asked about donations, like how much would you donate if you had $100? Out of that $100, how much would you donate? So they're just, it's suggestive evidence of the mechanisms. I think the better evidence was kind of the cognitive, because we used their actual test score, and then the cognitive overload, because we could see actually how many vacancies they could choose from. So when they had more vacancies to choose from, the cognitive overload was greater. So I think those were more objective measures. The others were more suggestive. I don't know if you have if you've done did you have you used a different type of test?
I haven't, but I'm now in a project in which I would like to measure attention. So yeah, I was wondering what you were using.
Yeah,
great.
It's called Stroop. Yeah. I'm not sure it's the best. If you come up with something better, please let me know. That's what we were able to come up with a short survey. Yeah.
But one thing that we've learned is that online surveys do not work very well. And we've tried many during the pandemic, and we get a lot of non-responses.
We find the WhatsApp surveys to work pretty well.
We've
run a lot. Yeah, we've run a lot with teachers, particularly, but some even with parents, and the response rate is pretty good, and they're very cheap.
We tried both telephone service and online service, and we had a lot of non-response in the online with parents. Maybe teachers.
They have to be very short.
Better.
In our experience, they have to be very short and very easy to answer. If they're too long and involved, they're harder. Yeah. But teachers, we usually get much better response rates than parents. So obviously.
Right.
Because they're more engaged, and especially when you're talking about like their job and the process. And when we send them, the government sends them. In Ecuador and Peru, when the government sends the surveys, we get much better response than if we send it. So we always try to do that through the government if we can.
Can I ask like a procedure question that it's so I heard some of you are mentioning WhatsApp, and WhatsApp is not so kind of there is a legal aspect that it's supposed not to be used for mass messaging, and so how, I mean, I have tried to use WhatsApp once without knowing this legal thing, and I got like that number banned in one day. So how does the WhatsApp, you know, the deployment? What are you using? Because it's really not supposed to be
No.
done for that.
Honestly, like
Yeah.
all the WhatsApp stuff we do through Princeton and we do with Chris Nielsen. I don't really know. I remember them
All right, so
talking about that. This
yeah.
paper, this work, we didn't use WhatsApp. Actually, we used text
Yeah.
messages with teacher work in Ecuador and Peru. But the stuff that we're doing with enrollment, because it's all linked through a smart platform that we developed.
Mhm.
That's a great question, and I remember that was an issue, but I would suggest that you talk to Chris
Yeah, no,
about that.
I
He
will
knows a lot
probably,
about that.
yeah.
Yeah.
What we did is work with childhood centers. So we would send messages to the childhood centers and they would send them to parents, for example. And that's a way to overcome that.
Oh, that's a good point.
But also you can also apply for a business account, a WhatsApp business account. We did not do that because we have to pay much more.
I think that's what we have, Anna. I think we have a WhatsApp
Yes.
business account. That's it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So you can do that. And then
yeah.
I think you have to pay for each message.
Yeah.
But you can do it. WhatsApp needs to authorize you, but
Right.
I mean,
Oh,
it's
yeah, or maybe
simple.
it hasn't changing then.
Maybe you go through your university, have something like that. I think that's what we ended up doing.
Right. Yeah. And that's interesting. But and maybe it has been changing because I recently like pretty much turned down an opportunity to do something with WhatsApp, using WhatsApp, because now even business accounts are not supposed to contact users like out of the blue. So you can talk to hundreds of thousands of people if they contact you first. But anyway, that's a very like a side comment. I'm gonna talk to Chris and
But I think you can contact them, but they have to agree to like
Yes.
participate right away.
I think so.
Yeah.
yeah.
But you can
We
contact
ask them for yes, we ask them for a consent before.
Exactly.
sending the
Exactly.
messages.
We ask a consent. You have to ask for a consent before sending any messages. That's for sure. And so, but take up is pretty good.
Yeah.
We found.
Yeah.
It's much better than text
than
message.
SMS.
Like you
Yes.
said, yeah, it's much better than SMS. It's more efficient. It's cheaper too.
Yeah.
And it's better because sometimes people have to pay for their SMS if they don't have unlimited.
Right.
I don't know
Right.
in Uruguay if it's like that. But yeah,
Yes,
it
it's the
also
same.
matters. Yeah.
Right. Perfect.
Well, I think that we are almost on time. If there are not any other questions, thanks everyone for a very nice session and for
Thank
being
you.
here.
Thank you,
And
Anna.
see you later.
Nice
Bye
to see you
bye.
all.
Let's see
Take
you
care.
around.
Nice to